Hello and welcome to yet another entry into my Legendary Licks series, the series where I examine legendary guitar riffs and licks that are legendary for various different reasons, whether it's because you think they're strange, because they're odd, or you think they're hard but they're actually easy, or you think they're easy but they're actually hard. And well, the titles just keep getting a little zanier, and now we have legendary licks that you can't play because they're in alternate tunings. You were in the wrong tuning. But luckily, you'll be able to play them after you watch this video, or at least understand why you can't play them. So I'm going to get into a little bit of music theory to kind of analyze the different intervals and chord shapes and things like that. So if you are interested in learning more in-depth music theory tools, tips, tricks, and licks, or just techniques, or if you're more of a beginner and you want to take the journey into the world of guitar goodness, then check out Guitar Super System. It's linked right down below. I have a huge update coming for Guitar Super System in the coming weeks, so stay tuned for that if you're already subscribed, or if you want to get in on the action, do so today. I highly recommend it. But then again, I'm probably biased. So let's get started with the first legendary lick that you can't play because it's in an alternate tuning. What is up with this guitar? These strings look a little odd. Let's see what they sound like. What is going on here? It's the Nashville tuning. I suppose designed to emulate a banjo of sorts? Believe it or not, it's actually just standard tuning, E, A, D, G, B, E. And now I bet you're wondering, Tyler, what legendary guitar part uses that tuning? I mean, what, some country song? No, not a country song at all. It's a little song called Hey You by this fairly well-known band, Pink Floyd. So that is the opening for the song. I'm sure you recognize it if you didn't know the name of the song. And David Gilmour would use this tuning on a couple different tunes that Pink Floyd played, but this one I think is definitely the most recognizable and iconic. And the rest of the chords, you can look them up if you want to learn this. I think the first step is actually getting the proper strings on your guitar. I had a fun time experimenting with what gauge strings would actually work and which ones would snap off, and I had to dodge and dip and duck and dodge. You get that movie reference, don't you? And then I finally got the right gauges down. I would say if you do want to do this, it's not terrible for like the intonation of your guitar or anything like that. I would probably recommend a slight intonation or setup adjustment. If you do want to leave your guitar like this, I'm probably going to string back to regular gauge strings after this video is complete. But for the E string, I would use anywhere between a 14 and 16 gauge string. So that's similar to like a G string or a heavier gauge B string. For this A string, I used a 12 gauge string. For the D string, I used a 14 gauge string. And this G string is tricky. You have to use a really light gauge string here, like 8 gauge. I actually ended up using a high G string from a pack of 12 string guitar strings. So I tried to use a 14 gauge when I was first stringing these things up, and that thing snapped like crazy. So beware of the string gauges when you are tuning up to Nashville tuning. But as far as the lick itself goes, and obviously this is more of a riff, but hey, Legendary Licks, that's a cool name, right? We are going to play this shape, which is just an E minor triad with an F sharp in the bass. And this finger picking pattern is relatively simple. Now this next part is difficult. The finger pattern is technically the same, but we're skipping strings, and also there's a strange thing that was happening with my brain because the highest pitch of this second chord is right here in the middle. It's the G string, and we're fretting this A note. But the thing is, your fingers normally gravitate to the high E string when you are playing higher notes, especially in a chord down here in the open position. So here's the pattern, then I'll tell you why it's kind of messing with my head when I tried to learn it. So you are fretting the first fret of the E string on the second pass, and you're also starting the pattern from the E string. So finger picking pattern is not only a little bit backwards, but you're also playing a higher string intuitively, and yet the pitch is ringing lower than that one. So normally if you're playing this chord, that note is going to be the highest one in standard tuning, the highest pitch I should say, and yet that is in fact the highest pitch in this particular tuning and with this chord shape. What I found was happening to me is I would kind of play like this, and I would just get jumbled because I would go to play this note when I was supposed to be playing that note. And it was just a big jumbled mess for the first few minutes trying to figure this out, but I finally did, and I have to say, now I can't play it really any other way, and it just sounds so great. David Gilmour, turns out he's pretty good at writing music. So as I mentioned, you can learn the rest of the chords. They're all just standard chords. There's a D major in there, there's a G, there's a C, and there's also a B minor. But put all those together, regular chord shapes, this finger picking pattern, and in conjunction with that alternating pitch, mind-bending action happening there, I think that's the coolest part to learn and the most instructive, I think, as far as sort of confusing your brain and your muscle memory to broaden your musical horizons. And I highly recommend just kind of messing around with this tuning, playing stuff you would normally play in standard tuning, because again, these are all standard tuning notes, just different octaves, but it makes everything sound a little bit more mystical. So that's just a major 9 chord. Here's just a regular major 7 chord, minor 7 chord. So check this out. Let's move on to the next legendary lick you can't play because it's in an alternate tuning. This next legendary lick is a, well, it's a riff and then it's a lick. It's a combination, if you will. And don't mind that I have a 7-string guitar right now. We're not going to be using the 7th string. My Floyd Rose is getting some maintenance done right now. I've moved to Nashville and found a new guitar tech, and I'm having some work done on some of my guitars. But I have a floating bridge, and that's what you need for this tune. And a floating bridge basically means you can go down or up, so you can pull a pitch higher or dive bomb if you want to. And the tuning that we're working with is drop C. So just take your standard drop D and then drop each string down a whole step. Now what song could this be? There's a lot of, heavy metal bands playing drop C, but this isn't necessarily a heavy metal band. No, it's just a man who can play heavy metal and literally anything else he wants to. This is a song called Bad Horsey by Steve Vai. And there's one other thing you're gonna need. A slide. Now that's heavy. So, where to begin? This is, I didn't really know where to stop with this one because it's just such an awesome groove. From the riff to the melody, it's just so tasty and heavy. We'll start first with the obvious cool element of this. We have a slide. So I have a metal slide. This is the kind of slide that Steve Vai uses in the music video, so I assume he's using a metal slide on this track. You can use a glass slide, but I think glass slides tend to be a bit warmer, maybe more catered to blues. So go with a metal slide if you can. I put it on my pinky, practicing just two little aspects of this riff instead of trying to play it all at once, and maybe using a metronome or a drum track or something to get the evenness between frets and slides right on the downbeats, because this is already kind of a slow and plodding riff, sort of like a horse walking. The fluidity is key, so I would just practice this to start off. And just really try and make those as even as possible, because this guitar isn't necessarily set up for a slide. The action is really low, so it's not an ideal setup. So if you can play relatively cleanly like this with a low action guitar, then you'll have no trouble with a guitar that's obviously set up for slide. So I imagine Steve Vai's guitar for this particular song was set up with a little bit higher action, because when the action's low, you'll get this kind of actual fretting action instead of having the strings kind of raised off the fretboard where you can move with a little bit more ease. So with all that said, it's no excuse. Practice until you can get it as close as you can, but again, it's really about the rhythm and the intonation more than anything. So once you have that comfortability level, then you can go down to the and take it from there. So without the slide, you can just get the riff down first. And that's kind of the main meat of the riff, and then there's two alternate endings. The first one being, so that is just on the 7th fret, D string and G string. And then the second ending is the same motion, but just up here on the 14th fret. And that's 1416 to 1417. And that's that. So just the awesome groove. So once we have that down, we move along to the lead part that happens over the same bass line as was in the intro. And I'm using a ton of gain. In case you haven't realized, it would be best if you had a noise gate as well, because really to pull this melody off with as much aggression and sass and all the pinch harmonics and everything, you want a healthy amount of gain and probably some reverb and maybe a little delay, a wah pedal of some kind. Wah pedals really kind of allow the pinch harmonics to bloom a little bit easier and activate those overtones. So it's going to be in your best interest to have that combination of effects. Normally, I don't really care too much to get close to the tone of these different songs and things like that. I really care about what we can learn from them. But in this case, you're gonna need those ingredients to cook up this guitar tone pie. Let's get started here. It's starting in the pentatonic position, the 10th fret, and it has the blues note that really separates it and really gives it that angry, bad, horsey sound. So we start off with, and that is keeping the rhythm that happens. So it's sort of like he's playing the rhythm and the lead at the same time. It's like a metal version of what Hendrix would have done or something. So we have the melody happens here, and that is 10th fret of the E string, 12th fret of the B string, 10th fret of the G string with a little quarter bend, and ending on the 12th fret of the D string. And then we are coming up here with the first glimpse of the blues note. That's nice. So sort of starts off as a traditional blues phrase. So maybe a blues player would play like, but he opts for. So we had that tritone. So put those two together. We're going to take the third position of the minor pentatonic down here at the 3rd and 5th fret. And that is just real fun to play, and it's pretty simple. We're just in these nice comfortable pentatonic bosses. Have a little bit of a bend here. You really want to hit that pinch harmonic if you can. So really work that one out by ear, because that's a good phrase to know. Just the classic. And then the classic bad horsey emulation, if you will, with the whammy bar. You're going to try and find a pinch harmonic here. And I usually can grab one around like this 3rd fret of the G string. So again, helps to have a lot of gain to activate that with relative ease. So putting it all together. And that's it, you know, for that part of the song. I mean, I should do an entire video on that song because I could keep going, but for the intents and purposes of this video, we're going to cut it off there. It's on you to learn the rest of that melody line and beyond. All right, we have a very interesting alternate tuning for this next submission. Sometimes I think songwriters just make up tunings that sounds like an awesome chord when you strum everything open. This one might be the most obvious testament to that fact. Check this out. We have a B and then all Ds. Now that's interesting. Never tried a tuning like this, but it does make for some very kind of floating, ambient, rather lovely sounds. And the tuning that this song is from, one of the biggest hits of the 90s. This is a song called Iris by the Goo Goo Dolls. And this is a really simple one, so I definitely recommend giving this one a shot. It's just a really nice sounding song, and I'm gonna play both the intro and the verse riff because I can get through them pretty quickly and really show you what this tuning is all about. But you could definitely not play this in any sort of standard tuning or anything close to it because, well, it's all D's and a B. All right, this is how it goes. I'm gonna play the whole thing through and then break it down for you. Very groovy, really fun to play. It's actually a little bit more difficult than it sounds or looks because of how much care you have to take of not getting too much washiness happening. And that's sort of a common theme with most of the songs in this video. You really have to accentuate the melody lines when you have all these open strings ringing. So for example, in the beginning here, you can hear that is really prominent, or I'm trying to make it prominent as opposed to like, you know, it kind of gets covered up if you are not careful with your pick attack and where you're really targeting. And that's something that you can work on, is really targeting the most force in the melody strings as opposed to the open strings. So you can consider the melody strings as like the fretted strings. So you really want to hear that. Breaking that down, we have this 9th fret and 12th fret on the A and D strings. Everything else is ringing out. Then we move that 12th fret down to the 11th fret. Then we're coming down here, 5th fret, A and D strings. 5th and 4th fret. And the strumming pattern is down, down, up, down, up. So, and the little turnarounds here is down, up, down, up. Same thing here. Now, moving on to the verse riff, and this one is definitely where you have to take even more care because this down-tuned B string is kind of floppy. So if you press too hard, it kind of goes a little out of tune, depending on how your guitar is set up. I just have a kind of a standard setup, which I will tune back to after this. So this isn't an ideal setup for this sort of situation, but regardless, when you have a real low-tuned string and everything else is relatively in the neutral range or standard range, it can tend to get a little out of tune depending on where in the fret you're pressing. So just be aware of that. But the finger positions themselves are very simple to remember. It's just 3, 5, 8, and then we have open, 10, 8. And that pattern is you can hear that one's a little out of tune, so you really got to be careful. And honestly, it helps to be gentle with it, which caters to this overall riff. So again, and that is a beautiful song that you can play around the campfire for your significant other. Oh, moving on. Next up on the list, we have an offering from one of my favorite modern rock bands, Alter Bridge. The guitar player, Mark Tremonti, awesome dude, awesome guitar player. Always just seems to write riffs that I wish I wrote. I could say that about a lot of guitar players. But this one in particular is awesome because of the tuning. And it is a song called Open Your Eyes. It's the main intro riff, and it's just, maybe I would call this tuning super drop D, because it's just that's filthy. So we have D, A, D, A, D, D. And I call it super drop D because it's just like this massive D chord. And the riff that is born from it is just rather delightful. Check it out. what do we have here? It's classic Tremonti, that happy sounding modern metal groove, but also a bit of edge to it. And one of my favorite parts of this riff is just the fact that you can put an exclamation point in the middle of this riff. And so it starts off with a couple dyads, and those are 2-note chords. On the 7th fret, moving up to the 9th fret, and then down to the 5th fret. And the rhythm is this. There's that big exclamation point, the big D chord. And this is interesting because it allows for open strings to ring, and that's a common thing with alternate tunings, especially open tunings. This is like an open D chord of sorts, so it really doesn't matter if you're not perfectly clean with muting the strings, because the open strings just kind of add to the atmosphere of this riff. But I kind of try to keep it relatively clean in order to accentuate the intervals that are most prominent, so those like kind of melody notes. And that is the phrasing that we're going to go for, so it's this real flowing legato almost sound. Following that up, we have kind of a quotation, if you will, of the melody, a little alteration, a little nuanced version of it where we go. So really accentuating those accents. Again, real groovy. And then coming up next, we have this bar on the 7th fret. On the 7th fret, floating up to the 9th fret. And after that, we have this sliding bar movement where we're going from the 7th to the 9th fret. So this is like a giant power chord where we're barring these 3 strings on the 5th fret and then using our pinky to hit the 7th fret of the B string. And again, it's important to think of this riff as really a melodic line. So we're going, that's the melody that we want to make sure to ring out. So don't get too carried away with open strings ringing everywhere. And then the turnaround is this. So relatively simple riff to play, but just so satisfying, and that's really a staple of Tremonti's guitar compositions. Is some of them are difficult, some of them are a little on the simpler side, but they are always just right there in the pocket of guitar goodness. So taking this whole thing pretty slowly so you can get it down. And the verse that I go into, I just add a little bonus there in the playthrough part of this where he gets to this B power chord and then a bar on the 5th fret. And then one of my favorite parts of big drop tunings and open tunings is the fact that you can use harmonics to accentuate these open strings. On the 5th and 12th fret respectively, and it's just really fun to play in this tuning. You can literally just move bars all around. Quite awesome, if I do say so myself. So there you have it. Legendary licks you can't play because they're in alternate tunings. But hey, now you can play them because now you know what tunings they were using. You picked up that guitar, we're strumming it like, why can't I play that? It just doesn't sound right. No matter what chord I play, it just doesn't work. Well, you just had to tune some strings differently than you normally would. leave a suggestion in the comments for the next Legendary Licks video. Legendary Licks, you think this, but parentheses, they're actually that. That's the working formula, and it seems to be pretty popular with you guys, and I love making these videos for you. Thanks again for watching. Make sure to sign up for Guitar Super System if you're interested in learning a whole bunch of tips, tricks, techniques in music theory and beyond. And until next time, keep shredding.